Hey folks, doing something a little bit different today. I fed some of my video content into Gemini to help me do some introspection. And I picked 8 videos. 6 of them went in, and then 2 of them I had to cut and paste transcripts. And so I had to say, look, what inferences can you draw about this Steve character? What do you know about him? So I had to do it. It's actually pretty accurate. I want to read it and comment on it because I think it's interesting. Now, why am I using AI for introspection? Because I have no one else to do it with. That's why. I mean, I could shop around. I could go find myself a psychotherapist and pay him or her what 150 to 250 an hour, and spend hours and hours and hours trying to figure this out. Or I could just put it into Gemini and get pretty accurate, not perfect, but accurate. So if you've been following my channel, which nobody has, I want to just talk about this because I think it's interesting. So I'm just going to read it aloud, and we're going to go comment. I'll interject. So the soft, I asked it to generate an essay and talk about what it knows about me. It says the sovereign persona, armor of the enlightened loser. To watch Steve, the creator behind the digital moniker Sisyphean Dung Beetle, is to witness a man who has transformed social alienation into a cohesive philosophical uniform. He openly claims the title of loser not as a white flag, but as an impenetrable shield. By declaring himself a failure by mainstream metrics, he strips society of its power to reject him. He presents a weathered, hyper-independent exterior, a man retreating to low-tech survivalism, engineering a life of severe contraction by raising quail, growing crops, and utilizing traditional hand tools like a manual scythe. Now, I haven't yet put the scythe into business yet, but I did talk about my effort to do so. I've been having trouble making myself a proper staff for it, but yes, that's fairly accurate. I'm moving on. To Steve, true sovereignty cannot coexist with modern convenience. He views the contemporary economic framework as a predatory trap and warns of a looming technocratic surveillance state, a dystopian collective where central bank digital currencies, biometric locks, and digital tracking IDs erase human autonomy. His push toward absolute self reliance is a practical escape hatch from an impending societal collapse, providing a profound sense of control that the human world has systematically denied him. The physical matrix, the trauma of atypical mechanics. Underneath Steve's grand geopolitical theories lies a raw, lifelong history of physical and neurological microtrauma. Diagnosed with autism and living with a visible Tourette's facial tic, Steve's very biology operates on a rhythm that mainstream society has spent decades trying to police. Since kindergarten, his mechanics have been heavily scrutinized. He was scolded by teachers for holding his pencil left-handed, chastised by his father for putting his feet down too hard while running, and mocked by coworkers for supposedly dragging his feet. Even his literal breathing patterns have triggered discomfort. Co-workers and romantic partners have abruptly interrupted him, unsettled because his chest does not heave to a predictable neurotypical beat. This constant interrogation of his baseline existence has left Steve with a profound rationalized hostility toward the mass mind. He notes with bitter clarity that his involuntary facial tics and offbeat body language mimic the appearance of pre-fight jitters. To aggressive, insecure peers with underdeveloped prefrontal cortexes, his unpredictable movements are inadvertently registered as a threat, inviting a lifetime of brutal bullying and demands for physical dominance. Steve recognizes that he possesses a lousy superpower, the innate ability to unnerve the most outwardly secure person in the room simply by existing. Because society has fiercely penalized his lack of physical conformity, he views global authoritarianism not as a distant threat, but as the inevitable macro expansion of a neurotypical world that demands absolute robotic compliance. He made a chart, Steve's psychological matrix. You start with neurodivergence, the autism and Tourette's. On this side, the moral imperative ought. We'll get to that shortly. You have the atypical body language and physical rhythms, the exhausting acts of duty, the social trauma, and the core defense mechanisms, the prophetic loser archetype, the radical low-tech survivalism, the rejection of mainstream metrics, the escape hatch, the karaoke box, the structured role. Let's talk about this. The exhaustion of duty and the sandbox of the sanctuary. Steve operates on an uncompromising, rigid moral framework dictated entirely by what he ought to do rather than what he wants to do. He practices agape, charitable, long suffering, unconditional love, even as it drives him to existential exhaustion. This paralyzing conflict is starkly evident when he forces himself to brave the volatile, high anxiety environment of a prison transitional unit just to deliver a sandwich to an incarcerated friend. He undergoes this terrifying ordeal not out of a deep emotional bond, but because the friend once supported his karaoke endeavors, and Steve's code demands reciprocity. Yes, even though I do like him, we're not close, but he supported me. This man who was not close to me showed up at my shows and like rallied his friends to attend and treated me like a human being. He treated me with, I was going to reciprocate. Absolutely. Um, when he succeeds, there is no joy or catharsis. There is only the grim anticlimactic relief that he managed not to be a coward. That is so true. I didn't feel good about what I did. I was relieved that I didn't fail to be a good person to him. Because unscripted human interaction is a cumbersome minefield for him, Steve has engineered specific structured sanctuaries to safely interface with humanity. The karaoke box. As a karaoke host, the software and mixing board act as a physical barrier. The scripted nature of the gig grants him a defined social role, allowing him to facilitate community and joy from a safe, structured distance. Accurate. When a rare, genuine 4-minute conversation with an attractive woman at a fraternal club caused his heart to swoon, his immediate response is a mix of intense infatuation and deep self-shame. Fearing the vulnerability of hope, he labels his feelings pathetic. Yet his instinct is to build a bridge. He immediately orders a manual dice game like Shut the Box and studies the strict rule of 8-ball pool. These games function as social sandboxes, activities to occupy his hands provide a rigid framework, reducing the terrifying pressure of raw, neurotypical small talk. That is totally accurate. That's accurate. I can't just sit and talk to somebody. It's overwhelming. I have to get something going, get some sort of rhythm going, um, playing a game, paddling out on a lake, doing something together. The empathic anachronism. Ultimately, Steve emerges a deeply complex walking contradiction, a man who questions whether the bulk of humanity even possesses an individual soul, yet remains entirely capable of profound grace. When a Wiccan friend who had previously rejected him brought him groceries during a severe bout with COVID 19, he discarded all ideological armor, viewing her purely as a literal vessel for the love of God. Let me just qualify this is where it gets inaccurate. I tried dating this lady afterwards, not before she brought me groceries. Just noting that. But yes, if you watch that video, I experienced divine love then. I don't know what else you call it. It was a beautiful experience. Uh, he harbors zero malice, entitlement, or resentment towards those who cast him out, choosing instead to quietly root for their happiness from the margin. That's kind of true. I have some resentment towards some people. I choose not to act on it. I look for the better angel of my nature, trying to deal with that. So that's kind of accurate. Let's call it like 80% accurate. Stephen's philosopher survivalist wrapped in defensive cynicism. He is actively gathering forgotten manual skills not just to insulate himself from a hostile world, but to serve as a quiet guide for others when the modern matrix inevitably fractures. He remains a deeply lonely but fiercely honorable man, protecting a remarkably tender core by stepping entirely outside of a civilization that's never built to accommodate his rhythm. Well, I'm not entirely out. I'm only got a toe out, but yes, that's the direction I'm going. And I haven't specialized in getting really good at any of these things. Just rudimentary understanding. And I know that someone else can take the ball and run with it once I show them what to do. So then I asked, I'm like, okay, well, I've done several videos about my romantic failures. So I asked, how does his romantic life fit into this overall description? It says Steve's romantic life acts as the ultimate validation and the most painful catalyst of his entire psychological framework. It fits into his persona not as a separate column, but as the deepest wound driving his cynicism, his need for isolation, and his fear of hope. His romantic experiences thread into the narrative of his life in three distinct ways. 1. Romance as a source of trauma and objectification. Steve's relational history, consisting of 11 past partners and one failed marriage, has left him with profound psychological scars. Rather than remembering these intimacies as a source of validation, he looks back on them with intense regret and humiliation. He feels he was never genuinely loved for who he was, but instead objectified as a therapy bot with a phallus, an inanimate emotional utility tool used by traumatized women to fix themselves before they moved on. Not exactly accurate, but pretty close. All right, yeah. This deep history of being emotionally utilized without reciprocity mirrors his workplace and childhood traumas. It hardens his view that human relationships are fundamentally transactional and predatory. I think that's generally true. I know there's exceptions. I know there's people who out there who end up have mutuality, but I don't see a lot of it. So I would say it's generally true. I get, it's at least 51% accurate. I'll put there. The weaponization of cynicism against the scam. Because his romance-induced wounds run so deep, Steve has weaponized cynicism as a preemptive defense mechanism. When a woman shows him spontaneous positive attention, like smiling or hitting on him at a bar, his baseline assumption is that she never finds him attractive. Instead, his neurodivergence and past trauma immediately trigger hypervigilance. He rationalizes the attention as a scam or a mindfuck or a cruel joke designed to humiliate him and mock his Tourette's facial tic. Uh, yeah, I can't get around that. This explains his surprising affinity for the incel community. He genuinely envies their total isolation because he believes that a life of absolute romantic starvation is far less psychologically damaging than the false hope and passive rejection he experienced in the dating world. That is pretty accurate. Part 3. The terror of the swoon and the sandbox defense. The incident at the fraternal club perfectly illustrates the agonizing war between Steve's human desire for affection and his defensive armor. When an attractive woman engaged him in a brief 4-minute conversation, his immediate emotional response was romantic swoon. However, because he views his own capacity for romantic hope as an extreme vulnerability, he immediately turned inward to punish himself, calling his reaction pathetic. To manage the terrifying unpredictability of his own infatuation, he immediately reached for his sandbox defense, ordering the shut the box dice game and studying pool rules by turning potential future interactions into a literal rule-bound game. He tries to strip romance of its emotional chaos, protecting his fragile, starved core from being crushed yet again. Kind of accurate. I mean, I wouldn't say that. Where is it inaccurate? I just feel like something's missing there. But I'll call it mostly accurate and call it that. Um, the structural fit. Ultimately, Steve's romantic life is the primary reason he's retreating into the wilderness to grow crops and cut grass with a scythe. Radical self-reliance and extreme contraction are his ways of building a fortress where neither the totalitarian state, a hostile neurotypical peer group, nor a heartbreaking romantic connection can ever reach him again. By choosing to be entirely alone, he ensures he can never be used as a therapy bot or a punchline ever again. Well, I'm not entirely alone. I have friends, and I still hold out hope that maybe I might, to use Dungeons and Dragons metaphor, roll a nat 20 on connecting with somebody romantically. I just, I don't think it's likely. And yes, it's totally about contraction. I keep thinking of, hey, instead of thinking about how I can make a lot more money, it's about how I can do things without money. How can I do things using existing physical resources? Right? I am looking to contract. That is a defensive mechanism. But it's not just a defensive mechanism because here's the thing. Even though there is an effort to instantiate a totalitarian technocratic state, and so I'm more sensitive to it because of my life experience, and other people who have just had a better life in that way um, are going to be more skeptical of the need to do something about it. So I can't just say that. Oh, it's just a cope. It's not just a cope. It is a reasonable course of behavior that also happens to match my life experience and my copes. So it's both a good idea and a cope. Anyways, I need a little more info. I'm like, all right, let's use more introspection here. I'm like, is there any clue why he seems to meet women who want to use him in the way he describes? Why can't he meet other types of women? To understand why Steve experiences this repetitive, frustrating pattern in his romantic life, it's helpful to look at it not as a stroke of bad luck, but as a classic self-reinforcing interpersonal feedback loop. Well, Steve genuinely believes that the world is simply full of predatory people looking to exploit him, and neutral analysis of his transcript suggests a complex mix of selection bias, protective cognitive filters, and complementary psychological dynamics. 1. The magnetism of the ought, the caretaker dynamic. Steve explicitly mentions he operates heavily on a rigid sense of moral duty, agape, or unconditional long suffering love. I'm going to extreme lengths to help others, even when he doesn't want to. That is accurate. In interpersonal psychology, individuals who are hyper responsible caretakers naturally attract and are attracted to people who are highly dysfunctional, deeply traumatized, or emotionally needy. This happens because 1. Familiarity. A person who expects to be uncomfortable or rejected may subconsciously seek out partners with heavily emotional baggage because fixing someone else's problems feels safer than navigating an equal, vulnerable partnership. That I don't want that. But from my personal perspective, hold on, we'll get to the answer in a second. The utility trap, because Steve believes that he has nothing to compete with anyone with, and calling himself poor, uncharismatic, and awkward, he subconsciously offers his utility, his emotional labor, and tireless patience as his primary value. When you present yourself as a safe, boundary free space to dump trauma, you inadvertently screen for people who just want a therapy bot. Let's talk about this. That seems to be a consequence of my patience and my long suffering. I don't want that dynamic, but I don't see why you can't both. Look, if you need to dump on me today, fine, but don't treat me as just a dump. Why can't people fill multiple roles for each other? Like, yeah, you could pay a psychologist, $150 an hour to dump your trauma on them, right? Um, but that's what your friends are for. Like, friends are supposed to be there for each other, at least to the best of their ability. So if I have a friend who needs to dump, or somebody needs to dump, I can, okay. But I want there to be more than that. I don't want to just be your dumping ground. Why do people have any self awareness? Like, all I do is ever dump on you. Like I had a long term relationship where I was going through a lot of frustration in life, and I always shared every frustration with her. And I've been, but you know what? I'm dumping too much on this person. We did other things. Like, she does not need to hear. Um, every time I'm feeling, awkward, I want to talk about it, intellectualize it, because we had a very intellectual relationship, right? Um, and I apologized. I can see how it can burden somebody. And does anyone else have that kind of introspection? Like, oh my God, all I'm doing is dumping shit on you. I don't know. I mean, moving on. Selection bias and social environments. The places where Steve interacts with the world heavily influence the types of people he encounters. Steve primarily socializes karaoke gigs and a local fraternal club. While these spaces are excellent for community, bars and nightlife venues are also environments where people frequently go to numbing, escape, or to cope with loneliness and life crises. As a karaoke jockey, Steve sits in the position of low-level authority and safety. He is the sober, reliable orchestrator of the night. For a woman going through a chaotic divorce, trauma, emotional distress, the stable, dutiful man behind the soundbar is an incredibly attractive target for trauma dumping. I didn't realize that. That sounds accurate. I didn't realize that. The confirmation bias filter. It is highly probable that Steve does cross paths with emotionally healthy reciprocal women, but his internal protective armor makes them invisible to him, or vice versa. Feedback look. Positive attention is a scam. Hypervigilance treats healthy signals as threats. Sabotage rejects low pressure healthy women. Only accepts highly transactional and needy dynamics. Confirms original belief. Because his baseline assumption is that positive attention is a scam or a cruel joke, a healthy, well-adjusted woman who expresses casual interest would likely be met with Steve's hypervigilance, defensive cynicism, or an awkward retreat. She will read his intense discomfort as a lack of interest and move on. Conversely, a woman who is highly chaotic or boundary blind will completely ignore his defensive signals and push through his boundaries anyways. Therefore, the only women who successfully break through his armor are the ones who are chaotic enough to ignore his discomfort. The kind of women who end up using him as a therapy bot. That 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 is interesting. I do think the fact that I don't immediately like read a red flag and rudely push someone away, the way some people might, or like I'm getting out of here, right? Um, okay, now they're going to keep approaching. No, there's something to be said about that. The terror of healthy connection. The Fraternal Club incident provides the ultimate clue. When an attractive woman had a completely normal, pleasant, low-stakes 4-minute conversation with him, it triggered a genuine romantic swoon. Steve's immediate reaction to this healthy spark was intense self-shame and panic. He labeled his own hope pathetic. Immediately bought a board game to act as a mechanical buffer for future conversations. This proves that an equal healthy connection actually terrifies him because it introduces emotional unpredictability. If a relationship is healthy, he has skin in the game and get his heart broken. If a relationship is a highly predictable transaction where he plays the martyr therapy bot, it might hurt, but it safely aligns with his belief that he is a loser and protects him from the unknown. Do you think his role as a karaoke host acts more as a genuine bridge that brings people toward him, or as a structural barrier helps keep humanity at a safe distance? I didn't further talk to the AI about this. Now, this is kind of inaccurate. Um, I was, yeah, ashamed of myself. I have no problem with an equal, healthy connection. I I don't know how to just. I can't have just conversations about bullshit with people. I don't know how to read it. I don't know how to do that. I need structure or I can't interact. Whether it's playing Dungeons and Dragons, okay, or any other role playing game, there's structure to that, right? If it's at a board game night, okay. If it's at a fucking karaoke night, okay. Um, I suppose if I were religious, then I would belong to like a church. If I were Christian, a more liturgical format like the Catholic. I was raised Catholic. Okay, so you know how you're supposed to participate, right? There's a liturgy, there's a call and response, and so on and so forth. Free form, just sitting there, it's very difficult to find someone. Now, I saw someone for 4 years who very intellectually oriented person, and we can sit and talk about stuff, but it totally devoid of not totally, but mostly devoid of romantic spark. That's one of the relationships that just took a dump. It died, and I don't know how to have conversations about bullshit. So I don't think that this part here, this it says this proves that a equal healthy connection actually terrifies him because of his emotional unpredictability. I don't think that's correct. I just don't know how to talk about absolutely nothing. Even though I enjoyed when the person come to talk to me, made a 4-minute conversation about something that's pretty. It was something in the news that was entertaining. Um, what else did I have to say about it? I think that this is not a perfect reflection, but it was pretty good as an introspective tool. I really enjoyed it, and I would add that if you're offended by the fact I use an LLM, that's just too bad. In the future, if you're gonna put me up against the wall for using it, well, I don't consent to the interaction, but whatever. I'm not gonna apologize. That's all I gotta say. Um, I'm a loser, and I'm a loser who uses an LLM to better understand himself because I have no one else to work with on that. So thanks for watching.